All right, so welcome everybody to our second session of Jewish Spiritual Practices. I'd like to start with a blessing over Torah study. As I said in our last class, every practice that a Jewish person does can be approached from a mindful and meditative stance, and including and most importantly studying Torah or studying wisdom. Torah isn't necessarily the 5 books of Moses, but it can be seen as sort of larger wisdom, perennial spiritual wisdom. So I'd like to start with a blessing for Torah study to just sort of focus our intention and arrive here and realize that what we're doing is sort of a holy work. I'll say the traditional blessing in Hebrew, and then maybe a little bit of a creative translation. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Holy One of blessing, your presence fills creation. You have brought us close to your teachings and have called upon us to study wisdom, to reach enlightenment. And let us say, Amen. Amen. So I wanted to start by asking all of you if there's anything left over from last session that you I didn't have a chance to ask me about or talk about, or if you read any of the readings that I handed out that you wanted to address or have me address. This would be a moment for that. So,
I was grateful for the meditation because I realized how very tired I was, and I was not. Yes, I was grateful for the meditation, the little meditation exercise that we did here, because it put me in touch with how tired I was. I was not aware of how tired I was.
Until you had a moment to just stop and sit.
I had plenty of moments to stop and sit, but I was not aware of how tired I was. And, I've done some meditation, and I've never experienced that kind of tiredness before.
Well, that was a very difficult week for everybody. It was right after Pittsburgh, and I think we were all emotionally exhausted, and somebody else who was in the class had mentioned, sent me an email and said that they weren't able to be present for the meditation because the whole time they were sort of thinking about, afraid that something would happen here. And so, even when you're trying to have the most deep spiritual moments, you might have a thought, or you might feel tired, or you might have a thought of, you might be consumed with fear, but that's the teaching in that moment, right? And I think many of us have studied meditation and spiritual practice, and that's sort of the ultimate goal of it, is just to be present to what's there. And so the fact that it's a real gift that you're able to be present to your exhaustion in that moment. So thank you. Other people have anything they'd like to add or say, or questions about the readings that I had?
Go ahead. I found these different levels of the soul very difficult to kind of wrap my brain around.
So, first of all, let me say that the reading that you have there, besides the story at the end, is all from this book. So now that you have this book, you can read it here. This book is from Zalman Schachter Shalomi, the founder of Jewish Renewal, and I can give you a little background on the book, and that might give you a little bit of context about the reading itself. But basically, this book was originally included as a chapter in the New Jewish Catalog in the 1960s. Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi was, one of the founders of the Chavurah movement.
So that was Michael Strasfeld's book? Is that what you're talking about?
Strassfeld, I think, was involved. There was a whole bunch of people who were involved with the Jewish catalog. And he talks about, if you look at this book,
Yeah.
it says the new Jewish catalog for the 21st century. So like everybody's trying to sort of recreate that. But so this was sort of a chapter in that Jewish catalog, which was a book which was trying to bring Jewish spirituality to the young Jews in the 60s. It got expanded over the years, and it was released to Reb Zalman's students in the 90s, early 90s, as a shorter version of this, and then it got expanded, and finally, I think a couple of years ago, like 5 years ago, it was released in this format. And so that's what this book is. And his position here is to enliven your spiritual life, and to show you different forms of Jewish meditation. And the way that he contextualizes all of it is talking about some basic Jewish concepts of Jewish mysticism, such as the 4 levels of the soul. And really, what he goes through here is very much what I talked about last time. Right, so it might, the language that he uses might be a little confusing, but on its most basic level, the 4 worlds are Asiya, which is the world of the physical body. Or the goof, yeah. Goof means body in Hebrew. And the world of the emotions, the world of the heart, the world of the intellect, and the world of the spirit. Now, the levels of the soul is another question which I wanted to go over today, and I think I included that as well in the reading. So we'll get to that in a little bit. It's basically the same thing, except for it's 3 or 5 as opposed to 4.
But the last 2.
Right, exactly. So you massage all the numbers, and it all comes out to basically be the same thing in the end.
But it's connecting it to the original text, neshama. Connecting it.
Right.
Yeah.
So all of the words for soul are related. Well, not all of them, but most of them are related to words for wind or breath, because the soul really is related to that in our spiritual tradition. Mike?
2 things.
Yes.
When we were discussing, we can't say what God is, we can only see what he isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the face of that, we say that man is made in God's image. But it doesn't follow. Maybe in God's imagination, he imagines a creature and created it, but I don't see how we can say.
Well, I think that's one of the perennial questions, and that philosophers have been grappling with. Jewish philosophers have been grappling with for centuries, and in particular, Maimonides had a very difficult time with that, right? Because Maimonides' whole theology is this negative theology that I talked about, which is you can't describe God with any language. The way that he resolves it is to say that the way that we can connect to God, the way that we are made in God's image, is our intellect. And so for him, he just goes to this entire sort of intellectual realm, right? God is like sort of the ultimate intellect, and that's the way you can relate to God. That's the way that we're made in God's image. A Kabbalist would say something different. A Kabbalist would say that there are 2 facets of God, right? That there's the Ein Sof, which is more like the Maimonidean God, right? Which is beyond any distinctions or any definitions. But then there's the Sfirot, which are the emanations from that, which correspond also to the 4 worlds, right? And the Sfirot is how we are made in God's image. But in terms of the Ein Sof, Ein Sof sort of pervades and is the ground of everything, but yet that's not the God. We're not in that image of that, because there's no way you can be in the image of that.
We also have a translation problem. In Hebrew, it's tzel or tzelem, which which the root is shadow. It's not image, it's shadow.
And that brings me to
That's interesting too. That's an interesting way of looking at it. That it's not that we're not necessarily the image of God; we're the shadow of God.
It's more like Plato's cave.
I like that.
And that brings me to my second problem, and this may be just internal for me, but it comes from the question that in our study we put a lot of emphasis on the Hebrew words, and then the roots of the Hebrew words, and then there's a word that has the same root someplace over here, and maybe it's because I found I wasn't up to it and I don't know Hebrew, I got a little resentful. I said, well, this is all-knowing, all-powerful God. He must know English. And then I began to wonder whether back in the day, the times of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were they speaking Hebrew? Were they speaking Aramaic? What was the language they were using?
They were probably using Proto-Semitic or something like that, a Proto-Hebrew of some sort. But it's an interesting question, that in many of the mystical texts, it's wrapped up in Hebrew as being sort of the language of the divine. There's a wonderful book from the 8th century called Sefer Yetzirah, which means the Book of Formation. And what that book says is that God created the world with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the 10 sfirot, or numbers. And so for the author of that work and the philosophers who use it, Hebrew is sort of one of the essential building blocks of creation itself. And then if you get into sort of the deeper stuff that I studied with in the doctoral program at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is Jewish magic, practical Kabbalah, you have examples of people thinking that if they can master the right words or the right letters, they can create reality. They can modify reality with their language, with their mouths. And this is one of the most famous of these is creation of a golem, and that goes all the way back to the Talmud, where it says that the rabbis engaged in the study of this book, the Sefer Yetzirah, and they give one example. They said these two rabbis engaged in the study of this book for some amount of time, like a year or something, and then at the end they created a calf. And they slaughtered it and they ate it. And then there's another example they said that Rava, the famous sage from the Talmud, created a human being, Rava Bara Gavra. There's a very famous phrase from the Talmud. And he sent it to some of the other rabbis, and they said, oh, you were created by Rava, and they destroyed him. So it very bizarre sorts of things. But the idea is, that underpinning all of reality is Hebrew, is language. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be, Hebrew as we know it today, or modern Hebrew. But if you look at, for example, the tarot, I don't know if you're familiar with what a tarot deck, but
It's the Torah backwards.
Right. So there are I think it's 78 tarot cards.
Journey of the Hero.
And there are 22 major arcana, which are the sort of the capital letter cards of the tarot deck. It's not a coincidence that there are 22 and there are 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Each card in the tarot deck, it corresponds to a letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and each letter of the Hebrew alphabet is sort of like a complex of meaning, like those cards, right? So like the letter Aleph corresponds to the Fool, which is the first card in the tarot deck, and the Fool is like the Joker in a deck of cards. It's sort of the beginning of any journey. It corresponds to the number 1, but also the number 0, and that's sort of what a 0 is, by the way, in mathematics, right? You can add a 0 to any number, and it changes it, but it makes it in the tens place or whatever. And so each letter has a complex of meaning, like Aleph being the Fool, or Bet being the magician, and there's a whole series of meanings about that, and Bet being 2, and duality and creation, and I'm not going to get into that today. Maybe some other time. And they've been playing with this for centuries and centuries. Thousands of years they've been playing with the Hebrew letters and the meanings of the words and the way they interact with each other, and they really had a deep belief that underpinning reality were these letters. That all of reality was sort of created based on letters. Now, I would say I don't agree that it's Hebrew specifically, but if you look at reality, reality is sort of created with language.
Yes, it is.
And I don't think that's not true. I think that's definitely true. And you can. I have a virtual reality goggles at home. You can put them on, right, and somebody will have programmed an entire world that you can look at. And that's the way the world is, right? It's all binary. It's all created with language of mathematics. And I think Hebrew, in their mind, that was the closest that they could get to the language of mathematics.
But perhaps, and you may have said this, I didn't hear you say it.
Yeah.
Because the Torah was revealed, or at least that's what Jews believed. It was revealed. It happened to be revealed in Hebrew. So that made the Hebrew.
Well, that was a question I had. Was it in Hebrew?
Well, it was a Semitic language, let's put it that way. It wasn't a Latin-based language or
that's where the Catholics went wrong. They went with Latin.
I think what's important and salient is one, that this teaching that the world is created on language. Whether that's the language of mathematics or Hebrew, to me that's not specifically relevant. But then the reason to me that Hebrew is important is it's this beautiful cultural artifact that's existed for thousands of years that's still sort of active today, and there's been a creative process of interpretation of Hebrew, including gematria, which obviously, when you figure out the number correspondence with the letters, and it's not necessarily like literally true, but there's a poetry to it that I think is just gorgeous and beautiful.
Well, I want to propose a thesis to you.
Sure.
It's not the letters, it's the sound.
That goes very much in line with, I think last time I taught here, I taught about Abraham Abulafia, the medieval mystic, and one of he used to teach these meditation techniques with letters, and letters and vowels, so consonants and vowels, and combination of the two. And his whole teaching was that you have to get beyond the meanings of the letters and the sounds, and actually sort of dive into the sounds themselves, and that there's a deep teaching of the sounds. And he talked about the vowels as being one sort of reality, and the consonants as being sort of another reality, and the vowels are sort of more basic to reality than the consonants. But there's all deep teaching, and a lot of that is based on the Sefer Yetzirah, which is that book that I mentioned about. They said the 22 Hebrew letters and the 10. Yes, that's good. It's good.
This is not to get you to learn Hebrew, because many people who are Hebrew speakers, they don't get it. They don't have a feel for language, so it's lost on them. But the Hebrew translated into the English is an interpretation, and because it is an interpretation, you don't get to interpret it yourself. You've missed a step.
I understand.
You understand.
Right.
I have one more personal peeve
Yeah.
that has nothing to do with this class or Kabbalah or anything. When I went to Hebrew school, and when I grew up in a Jewish community and went to temple, and it was an Orthodox temple, they pronounced the words differently.
Yes.
I still pronounce them that way.
Well, Ashkenazi.
Listen to me chant Torah, la, so, and it's how I'm going to say it.
Right,
And I don't care.
that part, besides the velvet curtain being missing from the arch.
Right.
That
It's-
was the
I always like to sit
Ashkenazi.
next to Ann Meyer because she and I do that.
and there's a certain
Yes.
beauty to using the Ashkenazic pronunciation, and I think that's something that got lost when they started educating young Jewish people in religious schools with the Sephardic pronunciation. But that came from Israel, that
Yeah,
came
right.
from the Hebrew that they spoke in Israel, which they based the pronunciation on a Sephardic pronunciation rather than an Ashkenazic
Right.
pronunciation. That being said, I know that the Ashkenazic pronunciation preserved something in the language that the Sephardic did not. For example, right, you have certain letters that are called double letters. They're letters that sometimes take a dot and sometimes don't take a dot.
Exactly,
And if you take a
yes.
dot, it's aspirated, meaning like b versus v, right? And if it doesn't take a dot, it's non-aspirated. And tav was one of those letters, right? So originally there was probably a tav and a sav of some sort, a thav or something like that. And so the Ashkenazic, that when you're pronouncing la'asol so, you're preserving that non-punctuated tav. So in some senses, it might be closer to what the original pronunciation of Hebrew might have been.
There
Although,
were dialects even within Ashkenazi. Actually, my father's pronunciation was Galiciana. And when he married my mother, the famous story was that her younger brothers and sisters laughed at the first Passover Seder when he said, Borikatu.
yep.
Right.
They said, he said, I don't know, like Eloheini. Eloheini came out like Eloheini.
So it's all a matter of context and perspective, I think.
I wonder why it developed that way.
It's just different dialectical differences, from different areas.
By other languages.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I said the wrong thing in the wrong house, like if I said Pishka, no, it's a Pushka.
It's like we say laugh, and in Britain they say laugh. It's the same
Right,
kind
it's
of.
just dialectical differences. So I would go back one more time, Mike, to Hebrew, right? That if you really want to understand, the reason I think I integrate so much Hebrew terminology into Kabbalah lectures that I give is because you can't really understand what the word is saying if you don't really understand the complex of meaning surrounding it. Like the word melech, for example. Hope you all got this from last time. So the word melech is like this. Now it means like ruler, right? But in Kabbalah, melech is very closely associated with the word malchut, which literally, if you were to translate it literally, it means kingdom. But in Kabbalah, malchut is the Shekhinah, which is the feminine presence of God in the world. It's the goddess, right? It's that aspect of God that suffers along with us when we suffer. you don't get that sense at all if you were to just say sovereign, right? Or ruler. But anybody who's versed at all in any Kabbalistic literature knows that the valence that this word carries is not. It doesn't get conveyed when you say ruler or king. And so when you say Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam, you could say sovereign of the world, ruler of the universe. But that's not what it means in a Kabbalistic sense. It means that part of God that's with us in the world, that suffers with us, that it rules over the world, but it's also present in the world in a way that other aspects of God might not be present in the world. So that's just one example of like a word that if you looked at it from a literal translation, or even from any modern Hebrew translation, it doesn't give the same sense as a Kabbalistic reading of that word. You can any of the sfirot, like the word tiferet, which means beauty, literally, but tiferet is associated with the transcendent God, the masculine side of God that is the golden mean and balance between love and judgment and compassion. And all of that is sort of wrapped up in this word, which you could just translate as beauty, but doesn't really give the deeper sense of the word. Which is why I'm not going to stop using Hebrew. That being said, I'll try as best I can to make it understandable whenever I need to use it. Other questions?
Yeah, I wonder if in the Jewish religion, it seems as if there's a stronger connection between the religion and the language than there is in some of the other religions, like the Christian religions with Latin. I don't think that the relationship is quite the same.
I think it's probably more similar in Islam.
Maybe.
Where the language is.
And I think it really goes back to what I was saying about the Sefer Yetzirah, which is this book that posits that God creates the world with language, and that language, in particular Hebrew, underpins the whole world. And you can even go back to the Torah in the creation story. It says, how does God create things? How does God create things?
He speaks.
He speaks, right? He says this, he says that. He uses Hebrew. He uses Hebrew, right? He says "Vayhi or." He doesn't say "Let there be light." He says "Vayhi or."
But Christ is called, in the beginning there was the Word. But you're right that they don't follow up on it in Christianity.
They don't have
there
the
is
same
that
relationship between the two. Like I seem to get the feeling that the religion has this underpinning of the language.
There is that sense of logos, which means sort of pure language or pure information. And we have that in Judaism too, which is chokhmah or wisdom. And if you look in the book of Proverbs, you see a lot of that. And the word Torah itself, the supernal Torah is associated with logos, and it's like pure information. It's like the program, like this is the world, right? And the programming language that makes this work, that's the language that underpins all of it. Is the logos or Torah or whatever you want to call it.
Probably history too, because of the way Christianity developed and was spread around lots of people who spoke many different languages. So
right, it's based on the Judaic tradition, which comes from the Torah was written in Hebrew, right? So if they were probably to say that any language is divine, they might also defer to Hebrew as being divine. The closest I would say is in another culture is Sanskrit. And they have a very similar relationship between Sanskrit and the world as Jews have between Hebrew and the world.
So, one more crazy thing. Okay?
Okay.
That means just following this whole conversation and the importance of Hebrew and the importance of understanding the truth of God, that as we move from Orthodox practice to conservative practice to Reform practice, and we use less and less Hebrew, we're moving further from the truth of God.
Well,
I think that's true if you're a know-nothing Jew. I really think that's true. But your heart's in the right place, and that's more important.
right, I mean, which is like I've seen some of the translations here, you know, like in Mishkan Tefillah, and I cringe. You know, to me it doesn't fit, doesn't work. I'm not Orthodox in any respect, you know, or even, you know, what I would argue for is more poetic, creative translations of the prayers.
I agree with you.
To make it so you might not get all the words exactly right, but the ideas and the concepts behind them are
I think
preserved.
they try to do that quite a lot in the
In Mishkan Tefillah?
in the Siddur.
Except that a lot of them are know-nothing Reform
They
Jews.
try to make it poetic, and some of the and they give multiple
I
translations.
think the older one, Gates of Prayer, was more poetic. I think when they
Yeah.
wanted to make it gender neutral, things kind of got bent out of shape.
Well, the Gates of Prayer is what brought me back to Judaism and to being away from it.
Hey,
Well,
if that
I
works
think
for you.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I'd like to sort of use that question to transition to some of what we're going to talk about. We're like almost halfway done with the class.
Shut
Or,
up. Sorry.
it's okay. I opened it up. I said, do we have any questions from last time? Good. Maybe next time we'll have less questions from this time.
Just don't ask us.
Exactly. So this is all related to this entire class and what I wanted to talk about, in the sense that each thing that we do in Judaism, whether it be a prayer or a mitzvah, giving tzedakah, eating food, anything that we do is supposed to serve a function, a spiritual, emotional, physical, intellectual function. And often what's happened is the function has become divorced from the form, right? And so we have the Amida, for example, the prayer that you say standing up in the synagogue. You know, it starts with the Avot, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, in there. And even people who might do this prayer every day might not actually know what the function is of of what that prayer is, right? And so, in that sense, I think that this question of translation and language is of utmost importance. Now, some people might say it doesn't matter, right? So, I'd like to get into our text here, this first Zalman text. Let's turn to page 6.
Automatically opened up to 6.
There you go.
before
It was
said it.
It's
It was
mystical.
It's
Bashir.
mystical.
I wanted to say something
Yes.
again. I'm sorry, but I looked up mystical to see if there was an English translation for that word, and all that came up on the Google Translate was misty, which is nothing. I mean, that's just a, Hebrew appropriating
Right.
English. But mystical sounds like mustal. Hidden.
Interesting. I mean, I think it's that.
So I wonder if there was a
I mean,
crossover somewhere.
in Kabbalah, they would say it's Kabbalah, which means,
To receive.
literally that which is received.
Yes.
Or it could be, they'll say, I'm explaining this derech hasod, right, with the secret, by the secret method. And this goes back to a basic concept in Judaism, that there are 4 levels of interpretation of anything I think not just of texts, but of reality. One is pshat, which is the face value, and then there's remez and drash, which is the metaphorical and allegorical, and then there's the sod, which it means the secret. And they say that any text you read will have, you can move down this or up this ladder of interpretation from the what it just says on the face value to the deepest sort of mystical, secret, hidden level. But yeah, I like that nistar as
There is no direct translation from mystical to Hebrew.
No, but if you were to say the word Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah would be your translation.
Of course.
Right. Although there was a Jewish mysticism before there was Kabbalah. I mean, I could get into that. There was a Jewish mysticism before there was Kabbalah called Merkava mysticism, which is a whole different class series that I could teach about. So page 6. Why don't I start and we'll just take a paragraph. Each of us will take a paragraph and move around in the circle. So, on the meaning of mystical. If we were to make a distinction between the mystical and dogmatic elements in religious practice, the distinction would boil down to how much of the experiential element is present. Mystical doctrine claims that we can experience the infinite right now, that beneath the surface of the obvious there exists divinity. The dogmatic approach, on the other hand, doubts the possibility of experiencing God on this plane, and contents itself with belief in revealed principles, reasoned theology, outward observances, and ritual. Religious dogmatists see little purpose in looking below the surface for hidden meanings and experiences. Religious mystics, on the other hand, see little purpose in simply reciting prayer formulae and not looking beyond them. And in that sense, I personally associate myself as a mystic. People seem naturally drawn to one of these two positions, to the exoteric, focusing on outer behavior and ritual practice, or to the esoteric search for the inner experience. In the Jewish tradition, the mystical body of knowledge is called Kabbalah, which literally means that which is received. Kabbalah is transmitted orally, only the outlines being written down. This is in part to protect it from being used without guidance. And because the mystical experience doesn't translate very well from direct experience into indirect words. Somebody else want to take over?
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're not looking for comments?
Or you can, if you want to make a comment, that's fine too.
What I remind me of is the Japanese tea ceremony. And it's a ritual. And to perfect it gives it higher meaning. So
Yes,
it
I also don't.
sort of
I don't
in
accept
the
this
middle
dichotomy
that you
at
can
all.
get.
You don't accept the dichotomy. Say
No,
more.
That's just, again, that's know-nothings. So you grew up with people who could not explain to you why you were doing what you were doing. So they were know-nothing, so you became a know-nothing. I didn't grow up this way, so it didn't matter, and I didn't grow up religious, so I'm not talking about myself.
Right.
But the whole idea is dvekut. I mean, for some people, the best way is through Dalkei Noam, the path of pleasantness. It's supposed to be pleasant, it's not supposed to be onerous, to go through these mitzvot, and by doing them, by living a holy life, things are going to come up for you, unless you're completely brain dead or emotionally dead. Things are going to come up for you while you're doing these things, and that's a holy life, and you're near God.
I think you give people too much credit, honestly, because
Yes, I know there are a lot of people.
I think there are a lot of people
Well, they're just-
who are content, especially in the Jewish world, to not look below the surface of what of the pshat level, right, of the face value level, and they can do. Some people do it and say, that's not for me, all that religious stuff,
Right.
and then they almost just look at the face value level, and then they say, and they dismiss it because they read a story about a talking snake, and they say,
Snakes don't talk.
snakes don't talk. So it's total bunk. It's total hokum. I'm not even going to take another look at it, right? So and then some people, might take a look at it and they say, I'm just going to understand it on the face value level, and I want to embrace it on the face value level, like a fundamentalist, who would say, yes, snakes. Well, if the Bible says snakes talk, then snakes talk, right?
Yes.
And I think you're giving
too much credit.
you're giving those ultra fundamentalist people who dismiss it, who accept it blindly and don't look any deeper than the face value.
Yeah.
You're giving them too much credit, and you're giving too much credit to the secularists, atheists, who look at it and dismiss it for the same reason.
Right, I agree.
But those both have in common, right? Both the atheist and the fundamentalist, is they're not looking below the surface.
A lack of religious imagination.
Right, and a lack of I like that, a lack of religious imagination, a lack of
soul.
of the desire to look at the soul of something, right? To look below. There's a beautiful quote that we studied in my last Kabbalah class here about the Torah, and it says that the Torah is like a garment, and it's a garment for the deeper supernal Torah, which is truth. The written Torah is just a garment that it wears, but you have to look below the garment. You can't just look at the garment and think that that's the person or that's the thing, right? And I think that there are a lot of people who don't look below the garment, and even in that quote, I think it was from the Zohar, right? They say, woe to those people who don't look below the garment, and they read the Torah from a face value level, and they just say it's just what's on the face value. And I would say that's missing the point entirely. It's missing the point entirely for the fundamentalists are missing the point entirely, and the atheists who dismiss it for the same reason are missing the point entirely.
Well, they're not intelligent. I mean, there are many people who are not intelligent. Let's just put it.
Well, I don't think it's that an atheist is not intelligent. I think that
it's
they
a certain kind of intelligence.
they're dismissive, right? They say, what do I need this for, right? But yeah.
Let's say.
Or I
Okay.
don't experience it. That I think
Yeah.
for an atheist,
Yeah.
this is not something in my experience. Therefore, I don't believe it to be true.
That's okay.
And that's not intelligent. That's saying this is my experience.
No, that's okay.
No.
I guess I was thinking, like, do not take God's name in vain, as being, for years, among a certain group of people, Jews, Christians, whatever, means don't curse.
Right.
What does it have to do with cursing? Well, it
Yeah.
might have something to do with cursing, but that's not what it's about. So that's what I mean by not being intelligent. I mean, read that sentence and what could
It's
it
not
be?
being a critical thinker.
Yeah.
That's sort of what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, but those who follow the law and do the mitzvah are the faithful. They have faith. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's enough.
Unless it gets them into trouble, like being fundamentalists, and in which case they're in trouble. You know.
Right,
That's
man.
not following mitzvah.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
I think
That's a whole
I think
other
faith.
stuff.
I think personally, as a rabbi, I think faith is important.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, but I think it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. You know that you have to have faith in life. You know that things happen for a reason to some degree, and that things are going to work out okay, and have hope. Right, like my
or
Rosh
faith
Hashanah
that
sermon.
There is an actual other reality that we don't get.
Right, that there's more to this heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your
Yes,
philosophy,
yeah.
right? That, but if you end there, right, and you just say, I'm gonna just walk into traffic and have faith, you know, or I'm gonna have faith that everything's gonna work out okay, but I'm not gonna, I'm gonna have faith that I'll get money, even though I don't go out and work for it, or I have faith that. Whatever. I mean, you get the idea, right? You can have faith,
But those are all.
and it might be necessary. I'm having a tough time thinking of specific examples, but you get what I'm saying is to have faith without without critical thinking and something deeper, and thinking for yourself, I think that's a problem.
Well, it's like having faith that if someone is sick in the hospital, if I pray enough, or don't go to the hospital, if someone's home and sick, if I pray enough, they'll get better.
Right.
And not use actual medical knowledge. You know, and there are people, there's a whole religion based on that.
Right, but that being said, prayer can be very helpful.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And a
but
healing
that's-
prayer can do wonders.
But here's the either or. It's not either or. That's, that's the falseness of the duality.
Right. I mean, what it is it's operating on one level, one of the four
Yeah.
worlds, right? One of the four levels of interpretation, one of the four levels of the soul, right? It just being there, but being stuck there. So should we keep reading a little bit more? Zach?
It's one.
Right.
No, this
You
is
guys are
really-
gonna.
This
Yeah.
is really important.
Okay, go
It's
ahead.
really important.
Because if you do the ritual and you said this is the righteous way of living, and then the Kabbalist comes along and says, well, I'm going to tell you the inner meaning beyond that, and I would turn around and just say, if I do it, I know it works, so I'm going to do it. I don't have to know the deeper
You
meaning
don't have to know the deeper meaning.
because I have faith.
And I think everything's not for everyone. And I really do believe everyone approaches it from where they are and take it in a way that works for them. And if what works for them is doing the ritual without knowing the rest, okay, that's the level they're on and that works for them. That's their Judaism.
I wouldn't denigrate the ritual among
Yeah.
intelligent people,
Yeah.
critical thinking people. I would not denigrate the ritual. And the main reason that I wouldn't do it is because at age 66, I have no commitment to creating an entire different way of life, which was
Wow.
what it would involve. But I wouldn't denigrate and say that they're only living on the level of ritual, because many of them are not. And
Can we keep going? All right, so, now your punishment is that you have to read.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready. It's like I fast on Yom Kippur just in case they're right.
Page 6 at the bottom.
There is a teaching in Kabbalah that tells of the original vessels created by God in the beginning, which God filled to the brim with divine light. The full force of God's light was too much for these vessels, and they shattered, showering shards of vessels and sparks of light everywhere. Eventually, shells formed on the outside of these sparks of light, hiding the sparks within them. This is the basis of the material world we live in today.
And so I talked a bit about this last time, that, again, I think we shouldn't take this story necessarily literally, but from a metaphorical perspective, right? What this says is that every single thing in the world, every single person in the world has a little spark of divinity within it. And it's our job to uplift those sparks back to their holy source.
We are stardust.
We are stardust, exactly. And there's lots of different creation stories within Judaism. One is the famous one from the Torah, but this is another one. And many of them involve a sort of primordial tragedy. A primordial breaking or fault. And I think this is one of the beautiful sort of metaphorical teachings from Kabbalah, which is that the world is not perfect. I think there are many traditions that would say that God is perfect, and sort of God created the world as a perfect system. But our world, but we have a recognition in many of our stories that the world is not perfect, that God's not perfect, that there's a certain flaw in God, which gives rise to this idea of theurgy, which is that we help to perfect God, we help to perfect the universe. That's our job on this planet. In every single interaction we have, in everything we eat, in every word we speak, our job is to elevate the sparks of holiness that are trapped in everything. Somebody else want to read? The Hasidic master.
The Hasidic masters taught that these sparks of divinity reside in everything, animate and inanimate, and that each of us has it in our power to redeem the imprisoned sparks and send them back up to their divine source through joy and divinity. The Kabbalah teaches that this release and reunion of sparks is accomplished by every holy act.
Beautiful. Right, so that's basically what I was just saying. Every single thing that we do has the potential to uplift sparks. I'll take over. What defines such an act is not only the outer prescriptions of behavior in the Jewish tradition, but also what we are doing on the inner plane.
Kavanah.
Kavanah, or what some people call chovot halevavot, which means the obligations of the heart. Right? There's lots of obligations, lots of mitzvot that correspond to what you're supposed to do with your body, but we don't talk as much in the Jewish tradition about what you're supposed to do with your heart, with your mind, with your emotional life. But there are texts, Kabbalistic texts, Musar texts, which are like Jewish ethics texts that discuss what's supposed to be going on in your inner life.
I'm sorry. No, never mind.
So that's all to say, I think, back to what Mike was saying, right? That the bottom line in Judaism is to be a good person, right? To just do good in the world. It doesn't really matter what you believe. If you're giving charity, it's important that you give charity. If you don't want to give charity, but you're giving it anyway, doesn't matter. I mean, what's important is that you're giving the charity. All of that being said, it can end up being sort of a hollow experience if you don't have the kavanah, if you don't have the inner life corresponding to what you're doing. Let me keep reading a little bit. So, what defines such an act is not only the outer prescriptions of behavior in the Jewish tradition, but also what we are doing on the inner plane. When we are offering the outer act of love, obedience, and service, that is only the shell of it. On the inner level, we are sorting out sparks, offering them up, creating a tikkun, or fix, or rectification from the original catastrophe of the shattering. That at least is the classical formulation. From another point of view, there was never a catastrophe. Only a loving, intentional, and creative act. The fact that things are not totally symmetrical creates the possibility, the imbalance that allows for this particular reality. The fall from the Garden of Eden then was not a fall at all, it was a setup to allow the human being to individuate, to become a self-conscious individual being. So, our job on this earth is to make everything holy, make everything lifted up to a spiritual level, whether that's eating, sleeping, being in a marriage, no matter what you do, it's supposed to be approached from a level of this is of sort of the deepest, holiest importance. And I just wanted to, before we have like 2 minutes left of my original time.
Maybe you are.
But I might go a little over now. But I'd like to just go through the levels of the soul, which you're right. It's very close to the four worlds, but I'd like to just go through it really quickly. So if you turn to page 8. So the idea here is that we are just like any act or anything in this world is not just what it is on the surface. Human beings are not just what we are on the surface. That we have our body, but then we have 5 levels of the soul. So I'm going to start reading page 8, second paragraph. Let's look at these levels with an analogy. Assume I'm looking at a person and asking myself questions about their character, who they are, how it is that I know them. At this level, I can say I know the person because of the body they inhabit, what it looks like, what its habits are of cleanliness, of dress, of behavior. This is the level of goof, of body. Right? So that's the basic level. We look at each other, we see each other's bodies. Nefesh. But this does not tell the whole story, of course. There is energy present and flowing in a handshake, for example, where I feel that I am in contact with that part of the person that is more than the person's physical body, that partakes in addition of the person's unique energy field. This is the level of nefesh, where nature fills us with energy and vitality, just as she fills all creatures in creation. Ki ha'adam hu hanefesh, for the blood is the life. The blood is the nefesh. The pulse, breath, and skin tone are nefesh. All of these are an expression of the vital principle in the person. Now, the way I conceive of the nefesh is like the lower brain, sort of the lower brain functions. You know, all of those things that pump your body, the blood around your body, your basic breathing apparatus, right? All of maybe the amygdala, you know, the lizard brain sort of functions, roughly speaking, corresponds to the nefesh. It's all of those basic physical functions that are performed, the things moving around your body.
Autonomic system.
There you go, autonomic system. What's that?
Energy flow.
The energy flow throughout your body, exactly. So that's the first level. And the way they conceive of these levels, by the way, is like Russian nesting dolls, right? That each one sort of nests above the other. There's this word merkava in Hebrew, which means chariot. But the way they use this word, and they say each level of the soul is a chariot for the other, right? So the nefesh sits on top of the goof, right? This vital soul, whatever you want to call it, animal soul, sits on top of your goof, your just your physical body, and then on top of that is this next level, which is called ruach. Within this field of energy, there is attitude, posture, and direction, bringing qualities of mood and attention that are beyond vitality. That's a weird sentence there, right? This is a manifestation of ruach. In a lilac bush, for example, there is reach, right? Same root, fragrance. The lilac says, "I am beautiful, behold me. Come, insects, draw from me my pollen for nature's work." This is the animating power of vitality with direction. More than just propagation, it suggests growth and going beyond the boundaries of self. Let's skip down to the last paragraph there. Ruach means spirited, a presence inhabiting space, so special places, holy spaces, will have a ruach of their own. The artistry of ruach shows in good drama, in soulful music, in devout adoration, and can be felt in a stirring nigun, or wordless melody. Right? And roughly speaking, the ruach level corresponds to the heart. Right? It's not up there anymore. Yetzira, right? The world of Yetzira. Right? So we have, I'm reminding you of the four worlds. Atzilut, that's the spiritual. Bria, intellectual. Yetzira, emotional. Asiya, physical. So the way that you might look at this is Guf and Nefesh are in this level. Right? Guf is just your physical body, and your Nefesh is your animal soul. Right? It's sort of that which is sort of the most physical. And then Ruach goes here, which is the emotional world. And that's why he says good music or pleasing fragrance. Right? It's something that appeals to your emotional side. And then the next level is Neshama. we've spoken of nefesh as the outbreath of relaxation, while ruach can be considered the breathing held in anticipation and deep intent. In this analogy, neshama is the in-breath. And this gives rise, you could do probably a little meditation with this, right? When you're breathing in, you're concentrating on your body, your physical body. You're holding it, you're concentrating on your heart, your emotions. You're breathing out, concentrating on your mind, right? In this analogy, neshama is the in-breath. Sorry, it's the opposite. The opposite, right? Breathing in, nefesh. Sorry, bring out nefesh, holding ruach, breathing in neshama. In this analogy, neshama is the in-breath. The word itself, neshima, is related to the Hebrew word for breathing in, or derivatively for being breathed into. That is to say, inspired. It is written, and God breathed the breath of life into the earthling's nostrils, and Adam became a living being. The Targum gives us a translation that says that Adam became ruach memalela, a speaking being. This implies the entirety of our ability to have thoughts and to express them, to direct thoughts and share them, to hold thoughts and see the vastness in them. It is in thought that we construct and discover our maps of reality, and neshama is that which, uniquely human, is ever involved in this process. While sensitive to contexts, it abstracts from discrete facts to the fields, theories, and visions it apprehends. Right, so that side of us that is our deep intellect, that is the neshama.
Along with the emotions. No, ruach is emotions.
Right, the ruach, but the ruach is set within.
Right.
Right, so each level is on the next. I'm going to skip Chaya and Yechidah because they're a little bit more complicated and hard to understand. But what I'd like to look at here is this reflection that he has on page 11. When we speak about a person, we mean the concatenation of body and these 5 orders of soul. As the attunement and attention vary from level to level, or where we focus at a particular time, that is the part of the soul that is then manifest. If I am involved in athletics, I am most likely attuned to nefesh, and my nefesh is in an active state. If I listen to a piece of music or attend a drama, then my ruach is most likely involved, while my nefesh is in a quiescent state. When meditating on ideas, I'm attuned primarily to neshama and not to other parts of my being. Now, though we speak of these levels distinctly, they are, of course, interdependent. That's how I'm responding to you. This is what we mean by the phenomenon of merkava, or chariot, so often spoken of in Kabbalah. Even when I'm in meditation or contemplating with neshama, I need the assistance of ruach and nefesh as well as the body. So my neshama is riding in the ruach of an awakened heart, which is riding in the nefesh of an awakened energy field, which is riding on the guf of an awakened body. In this kind of chariot, one vehicle is invested in another. Further, I cannot say that the rider in the chariot is the neshama, because even it is being driven by something that rides even higher, the chaya, the next level of soul. And chaya itself is being energized and focalized into existence by the specificity of that yechidah, which is the highest level of the soul, which is that individuated aspect of the infinite. It's almost one with God, this thing called yechidah. Yechidah means oneness. Here is an example that illustrates the dynamic interplay of the levels of the soul. There is a compliment that nobody has given me before, but that I feel I deeply deserve. Of all the compliments I've ever received, all of them are chaff in comparison to this one I have not yet received. It is the important one. Then somebody gives me this compliment, and I begin to cry. Why am I crying? What has happened? What has happened is not that just that affect has felt pleasure in the compliment, that affect has felt pleasure in the compliment, but that chaya, that part of myself for which I do the deepest things in my life, has suddenly found recognition of its intention and let go. The melting that takes place at such a moment is chaya melting through the dimension of ruach, the emotions, and the purpose of my life is given a moment of fulfillment. All the trouble it has taken to get here seems to have been rewarded. It was worth it. That peak experience affirming that it was worth it is what's called olamecha tireh b'chayecha. This is getting olam haba, the world to come in this world, and the striving is over at that moment. There is a sense of I'm home. that excites Yechidah. Yechidah is that part of you that's one with God. And if we can stay with this in the heart, not clinging to it, but staying with it and breathing into it further, suddenly we see it not from the point of view of the recipient, but from the point of view of the divine grantor. And my identity is for that moment with the divine saying, my child, today I have begotten you. This was the purpose of eternity. It's a beautiful writer, Reb Zalman. Right, so part of what he's trying to show is that all of these different levels are interacting with each other all of the time. And each one of them is a potential opening to God and the infinite. And every practice that we do in Judaism can be affected on all of these four levels. And if you look at a traditional prayer book, they divide the prayers into four categories. And the four categories correspond pretty closely, from my perspective anyway, and from some other mystic rabbis' perspectives, to the four worlds. So in the morning when you wake up, the first prayers you say in morning prayers are body related, right? And then after you say the body related prayers, which are things like thank God for my eyes being open, thank God, right, and for getting me able to put on clothes and stand up straight, right, all these body related things. And then we do the Psalms, which are, we sing songs, and that's related to the heart. Then we say the Shema, and we read a little bit of Torah text, and we think about sort of deep concepts of philosophy. That's the intellect. And then we have the Amidah, which is this moment of oneness and unity with the divine, and that's Atzilut. And so all of these four levels of the world are related to these five levels of the soul. So that's it for today. We went over about 12 minutes. I hope you guys are okay. Is there anything people want to say in conclusion before we end up?
He's looking at me. Makivah.
I'm looking around.
Makivah mukav means, what's a good translation of mukav? It's composite or...
complicated.
Not necessarily complicated, but things that go together. I can't think of an English
Composed?
word.
No.
Compose is better. Mesh is good. Mukav, complex. Complex, yeah.
Or a complex, you know.
A complex,
Yeah.
yes.
So, thank you for adding that. We'll see you all. I'll see you all in another 2 weeks. I think is our next class. It's after Thanksgiving. So, I wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. And I invite you to, if you have time, read the introduction to his book here. If you could read through to page 15, that would be great. And I also invite you to look at the Strassfeld book. It's got a lot of what I was saying, and also he talks about his background in writing this book and how he was involved in the Chavurah movement, and he was, trained in one context, but then he sort of took on a more spiritual aspect of his Jewish practice. So I invite you to look at this as well. Thank you all for coming. Like I've said, more than the student wants to learn, the teacher wants to teach. So you've all given me a gift tonight. Thank you.
Did your son's tooth come out?
Yes.
Oh, hallelujah.